There's a kind of horror that doesn't rely on jump scares or gore. It creeps up on you, buries itself deep inside your mind, and lingers there long after the credits roll. One of the finest examples of this kind of horror is Brad Anderson's 2001 psychological horror, Session 9, a film as unsettling as the abandoned asylum that it was filmed in. Well, hello there everyone. My name is Falcon, and welcome back to What Am I Watching? I'm so pleased to have you here this evening, and even more so, to be your narrator. In this video, we're going to break down the making of Session 9, its eerie story, how it was received by audiences, and its growing reputation as one of the most underrated horror films of the 21st century. Let's dive into darkness. Directed by Brad Anderson, known at the time for indie comedies like Next Stop Wonderland, Session 9 marked a dramatic shift into horror for the filmmaker. Anderson co-wrote the script with Stephen Jevedon, who also stars in the film. The entire movie was shot on location at the real-life Danvers State Mental Hospital in Massachusetts, and this wasn't just any old spooky location. Danvers was one of the most infamous mental institutions in America, often cited as the birthplace of prefrontal lobotomies. The hospital had been abandoned for years before filming, left to rot, to decay. Its melting walls, flickering lights, and maze-like corridors weren't just the result of set design. No, they were the real deal. In fact, much of what you see in Session 9 is exactly how the hospital was found. Anderson chose to film using 24p digital video cameras, a relatively new and untested technology for the time. This gave the film a unique, grainy, almost documentary-like texture that added to the unsettling realism. The low budget of around $1.5 million meant the crew had to work quickly, often making use of natural light, and shooting in actual decaying rooms full of asbestos and dust. Anderson has said in interviews that the hospital itself was a character in the film, and he wasn't kidding. The oppressive, decaying environment steps into every frame of the film, making the atmosphere almost unbearable by the film's conclusion. On the surface, Session 9 is about an asbestos removal crew hired to clean out the Danvers State Hospital. However, beneath this is a layered narrative about paranoia, guilt, and the disintegration of the human mind. The film focuses on 5 main characters: Gordon, the crew's boss, played by Peter Mullen; Phil, played by David Caruso; Mike, played by Stephen Jevedon; Hank, the cocky coworker, played by Joshua Lucas; and Jeff, Gordon's nephew, played by Brandon Sexton III. What starts as a simple job quickly unravels as strange things begin happening within the asylum. Gordon, who is already dealing with personal stress at home, starts hearing things. Mike discovers a series of old audio tapes labeled Sessions 1 through 9, recordings of a former patient named Mary Hobbs, who seemed to suffer from dissociative identity disorder. As Mike listens to the tapes, we learn about Mary's fractured mind, each session revealing more disturbing information about her multiple personalities: Princess, Billy, and Simon. Meanwhile, tensions among the crew rise. Hank goes missing. Gordon's behavior becomes increasingly erratic. The line between reality and hallucination blurs as the film begins to build to its horrifying climax. Spoiler alert, if you don't want this ruined, please, I implore you, watch the movie and come back. In the end, it's revealed that Gordon, driven by a mixture of stress and madness, perhaps even something more sinister within the hospital itself, murdered his wife and child prior to the events of the film. The final tape, Session 9, reveals that Simon was the dark force inside of Mary. who spoke from.
In the weak and the wounded.
This chilling line resonates with Gordon's mental collapse, suggesting that he too was vulnerable to some kind of internal possession or psychological break. The film ends ambiguously, leaving audiences to wonder whether the hospital itself was a malevolent force or if the horror was purely human all along. When Session 9 was released in 2001, it barely made a dip at the box office. It had a limited theatrical release, earning just over $1.6 million, barely making back its budget. Critics were split. Some praised its atmosphere and psychological depth, while others dismissed it as too slow or obscure. On Rotten Tomatoes, at time of recording, it currently holds a 67% approval rating. This isn't bad, but nowhere near what it deserves. Audiences were similarly divided. Some appreciated its slow burn approach and ambiguous storytelling, while others, expecting a conventional horror movie, left disappointed. But, like many great cult films, Session 9 refused to fade away. Horror fans began rediscovering the film, drawn into its oppressive atmosphere, chilling sound design, and Peter Mullen's incredible and underrated performance. It became one of those films whispered about in horror circles, recommended as that movie that really gets under your skin. Okay, so here I am breaking the script again. I'm going to try not to make this a habit, but I wanted to talk about how scary this movie really is. I grew up on horror films. I was raised on horror. There's a scene in this movie that is absolutely terrifying. It gets under my skin. It scares me, and not a lot of things can do that. The scene where Gordon's nephew is stuck in the underground tunnels and the lights are going out one by one, and he's panicking, knowing he's going to get lost, knowing that he is going to get stuck down there, freaking out. That scene terrifies me. It scares the ever-loving shit out of me. And I absolutely love it. This kind of horror needs to be done more. Horror films nowadays are really just about the monsters, the CGI, the jump scares. Jump scares aren't scary. They're shocking, but not scary. Anyway, with that rant out of the way, I'm going to continue. Sorry about the interruption. And in time, Session 9 earned a reputation as a horror classic in disguise. Today, Session 9 is widely regarded as a cult classic. It frequently appears on underrated horror lists and has been reevaluated by critics, who now appreciate its subtle, atmospheric horror and psychological complexity. The film has influenced a generation of horror filmmakers who cite its minimalistic approach and incredible sound design as major inspirations. Its emphasis on mental instability and unreliable narration paved the way for modern horror films like The Babadook, Hereditary, and The Lighthouse, which similarly blur the line between the supernatural and psychological break. Unfortunately, the Danvers State Hospital, which was such a vital part of the film's success, was mostly demolished in the mid-2000s. Luxury apartments now stand where the asylum once loomed, but the legend of Danvers and Session 9 lives on in history, on our televisions. It's a testament to the film's quiet power that even 2 decades later it still sparks debate, analysis, and admiration from horror fans worldwide. Session 9 is a perfect example of how horror doesn't need monsters or blood, cheap thrills to terrify. Sometimes the scariest things are what lurk inside of our own minds. It's a film about guilt, madness, and the line between sanity and horror. If you haven't seen Session 9, please do yourself a favor and watch it alone, in the dark. And if you have, what did you think? Did the ending make you question what was real? Was this a purely psychological movie? Or was there something more? Who was Simon? A piece of fractured mind? Or was there something more to Simon? I have my belief, and I would love to know yours. Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please hit that like button and subscribe for more horror deep dives. It's the best thing you can do for a growing channel like mine. And share the video with fellow horror fans who might have missed this hidden gem. Until next time, stay safe and stay out of abandoned hospitals. The making of Session 9 is a story of atmosphere, risk, and raw guerrilla filmmaking. Directed by Brad Anderson, known for the time for indie comedies like Next Stop Wonderland, Session 9 marked a dramatic shift into the horror, into the blah, 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 no, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, let's try that again. Hank, the cocky, Hank. God, it sounds like I got a thing from Hank. Yeah, Hank. Wow, I'm never doing that again.